Well, thanks for inviting me. This is probably my favorite hotel in the world, by the way, but I have to drive back, but it's a great spot. So I thought maybe I'd talk a little bit more generally about healthcare because there's some change agents and innovators in the room, and I think it's an opportunity. It is a time for opportunity. Um, but if I'm sorry, am I blocking?
That's okay. I was going to actually
Let me turn it off.
fill this up.
Okay.
Get in the line.
You know, it's a time of great change, obviously. I always made a joke. I used to represent La Jolla on the city council in San Diego. La Jolla is a community of chiefs. And I always used to say there's two attitudes about change in La Jolla. There's one group that's deeply, deeply skeptical of change, and the rest of the people are absolutely opposed. And that's a pretty common attitude about change in society. But obviously, with the healthcare law, there's a lot going on, and I have a real problem with how Washington's handling it in the big picture. You know, on the Affordable Care Act, if you want to talk about nuts and bolts, I get a lot of those questions, and just parenthetically on that, it is not a finished product by any means. I spoke to a business group yesterday, and they said, do you support Obamacare? And I kind of think that that's question is behind us. We saw it get passed before I was there. I've only been in Congress for 10 months. I'm a freshman. But it was passed in 2010 by Congress. It was signed by the president, survived the Supreme Court challenge, 40 repeal votes, and just recently they tried to shut the government down over it, and that didn't work either. The thing is still there. It's going to survive. We're going to have to figure out a way to make it work. The good news is that it's based off of something in Massachusetts that works, and so somehow they figured it out. The bad news is that it got a lot of rocky road ahead of it. So I said, it's time to move past the political stuff and figure out how to give this thing the best shot to work that we have. Obviously, before this system, we didn't really have a way that worked either, and healthcare costs were rising out of control. It was eating up more and more of our federal budget. We have to try something. I think we should give this a try. So, but I think there's a lot of work left to do in terms of reaching affordability. And clearly, the website is more than a glitch. The most important thing, as you would understand, for making healthcare affordable through an insurance plan, which this is that we get healthy people to sign up, the people who may not feel like they have to worry about it today. And the website glitch really made it hard for someone who's 27 years old coming off their parents' plan to get on the website and make that transaction. I proposed a bill that made the Democrats mad. But I said, listen, let's call a timeout. We gave the businesses a year delay on the mandate. I also voted for a year delay on the individual mandate. That didn't go anywhere. But let's at least give people a timeout while we wait for the website to get back up and running. That seemed like a reasonable thing to me. But I understand they're making phone calls to us to tell us not to do that. It's all right. So that's okay. That's okay. They know who I am. So I've been rated the fourth most independent Democrat in Congress and the most conservative Democrat in California, to which my wife says, big deal, California. But I think there are more fundamental problems I'd just like to address about Washington, D.C. Let's start with the culture. People ask me what's the biggest surprise that I found in going to Washington, and it's the difference in culture between here and there. In San Diego and all throughout California, it's common for us to sit around a table, talk about a problem, to collaborate, to cooperate, and come up with a solution, and even an innovation, just by kicking around ideas. Now you see research labs in my district are built so that people literally come into contact with each other as they're doing research so that they can trade ideas. And it's a conversational kind of leadership. It's a leadership of thought and respect and listening. And in Washington, unfortunately, and that's a leadership, by the way, that thinks about the future. In Washington, it's quite different, and we take it for granted here. But as you can see, this is a leadership that's about the past. There's a tremendous amount of bitterness in Congress among people who've been there for a long time. And there's also a lot of discussion about what your rank is or what your title is or even what school you went to. And I think I could play that game if I wanted to, but I mean, I forgot about people caring where you went to college. That's just not what we worry about out here. So and sometimes I get the feeling that if you tell me what your rank is, or your title, then I'll tell you whether you have a good idea. And it's not a system, to say the least, built for innovation, which is too bad in a tremendously challenging time like this, where we're facing change is so rapid in the private sector and the economy. If you think about the digital economy, if you think about energy, if you think about globalization, there's a lot of need to adapt. And the government is uniquely and, I think, insistently resistant to adaptation and for change. So we could take this kind of attitude of innovation, collaboration, cooperation to Washington, D.C. That would be very helpful. And I ask for your engagement on this, just to encourage that kind of thinking, because what you see is people are really stuck. I'll just give you a couple, a story that happened to me. I've developed a relationship with Darrell Issa. Now, Darrell Issa is not in my party, and I don't really, I think he's way too concerned about Benghazi. I think he's doing a lot of politics, but I have no reason to be in a fight with Darrell Issa. He's a very powerful guy. We have some territory in common. He's my neighbor to the north. There's every reason for us to try to work together, even if we disagree, to get along together. I was talking to him on the floor of the House, because you run into people there, and after we finished our conversation, he walked away. A longtime Democrat came up to me and she says, "Why do you even talk to them?" Right? And there's 20 Republicans who were elected in 2010 who brag that they've never spoken to a Democrat the entire time they've been there. So it's obviously a toxic kind of environment. But like I said, I think, as you said, there's a lot of opportunity. And the main thing I see is that as we change the way we deliver healthcare, there's a real opportunity to provide much better care, a much more efficient way. And a lot of it's happening in Southern California with telehealth and other new ideas about delivering care. We tend to view healthcare as an accounting problem in DC. So you have this much to pay for. So how am I going to close the gap? Well, I'm either going to lower reimbursements to providers and doctors, or I'm going to raise taxes and fees to people, and that's my answer. And we could do better than that. We're doing better than that here. Imagine if you're Qualcomm is involved a lot in telehealth, but imagine a technology, and Dr. Eric Topol, I'm sure you guys are familiar with him. Imagine if you were a diabetic and you could have your glucose levels monitored over your cell phone, or a cardiac patient, you could have your cardiac behavior over a cell phone. You'd save the cost of an office visit, of a ambulance ride, or maybe even a stay in the hospital, maybe even save your life. And the incentives will start to take shape for that as we move from a fee-for-service system to more of a population-based healthcare. So if you're a doctor or a group in charge of a group of patients, something like the technology I just described would all of a sudden look very cost-effective. You wouldn't worry so much about how much will I get for looking at this email, but you think, how much will I save off the amount of money that I'm getting for this patient? How much better care can I provide? And that kind of stuff is happening here. We're at $1,000 genome at Life Technologies. You guys talked about this already?
We've hinted about it in private conversations, but both Life Technologies and Illumina.
At Illumina, right. So both in my district, well, actually, Illumina is. We pretend that Life Technologies is in my district. But it's in our region, and think of the kind of personalized medicine that will develop. And people say, "Oh, it'll never work." Well, I got to tell you my story. I'm looking around here. I think I'm probably older than most people here. But I went to chemistry class in 11th grade, and we had something called the slide rule. And I bet, like, most of you have never even seen a slide rule. But I ordered one off of eBay, so I'd have one in my office, because I keep talking about it and no one knows what it is. But it was you do your calculations, and you'd slide this thing in the middle, and you had this little plastic bar, and you'd line up the numbers, and you were able to calculate square roots and stuff. And in 11th grade, this is in the late 70s, a kid walks in to our class, chemistry class, and had a $400 Texas Instruments calculator. And my dad's a minister. There was no way we were going to afford a $400 calculator, right? But so the kid wasn't allowed to use it in the test. He had to use a slide rule like the rest of us. By the way, I think I must have been so smart in 11th grade, I tried to figure out how I used that damn thing. It was hard to figure out, the slide rule, right? But look what's happened now. I mean, you get that same calculator on your cell phone. It's just everything's on there. Or, if you want to buy a separate one, it's one of those little Casio things that's made out of plastic with a little solar panel that comes up. It can't cost more than $5. How did that happen? It happened through innovation. And innovation always drives the cost of things down. Same thing when I was a kid, my parents saved so that we could have the World Book Encyclopedia. And every year, I used to look forward to the annual update. I don't know if we went through this, right? You get a book every year that would update everything. In practicing law, you had these law books, really expensive, and they would send you a pocket part that you'd slide in for the new law every year, right? That's all gone. My kids don't need it. My kids probably never even touched an encyclopedia. It might be a decorative thing in my in-laws' place, but they get their information much more efficiently through innovation for free. And we just don't think about healthcare like that, but that's got to be where it's going. So we can find better, more precise ways to do things, and we can do it in a more efficient, effective, and provide better care cheaper. And that's the great thing. That's the great promise for healthcare now, is what's happening in innovation in technology and the delivery systems, new incentives. So, I know we're arguing a lot about Obamacare and the nuts and bolts of that. And for your businesses, I know that there are tremendous accounting and regulatory things you have to contend with. But in the big picture, I think there's really a lot of promise for fundamentally changing and improving healthcare delivery through this kind of research. So it's an exciting time to be there. But again, you understand this much better in this geographical place than they do in Washington, D.C. The other thing is, I would say, too, California in general has done a better job of innovating within the hospital, too, about how you deliver health care and how you provide incentives. A lot of places are still very, very much in the fee-for-service, old-style doctor place. It's going to take some time for them, too. So the hope is that this system will provide the right incentives for population-based care, that within that population-based care, providers and doctors will say, wow, these are new technologies we can take advantage of, and we'll be able to provide better care at better cost. And I'd be happy to hear from you. You probably got some good ideas for us.
I have a question for you. So, my name's Mike Zill. I work at Care Fusion.
Oh, they're at Care Fusion. I visited them.
Your district. And I think Greg probably lives in your district over at life. So,
Right.
he lives there and pays taxes in your district, so it's good. The question
I don't get them.
The question I would have, I know that. The question I would have for you is that I agree with your view of California.
Yeah.
I've lived here about 12 years, and I've lived in other parts of the country, and there's definitely a different can-do kind of thinking out here. And my question to you is, have you guys in the California
Great question.
Congress team ever thought about, you know what, we're just going to lead across the aisle, and the hell with these other guys, we're going to show, we got the most, almost the most, I guess, maybe the next thing's New York, we got the most Congress people. If you guys could get together.
This is a
can't we do that?
great. Well, first of all, I would have totally pandered to you if you told me, if I knew it from Care Fusion in the first place. But I visited Care Fusion. I met Kieran, and walked around the whole thing. I was very impressed. The other thing I would like to mention that's in the way is we're trying to repeal that medical device tax, which is of great importance to them, because we're driving these great jobs and this great technology offshore. And the other thing in that space is the FDA approval process is particularly slow. So they've improved in some areas like oncology, but in medical devices, they're really slow. And we find, and these are Care Fusion taught me, that there's examples of devices that are invented in the United States that are available to patients in Europe 3 to 5 years earlier than they are to our own patients. And inevitably, that's going to drive those jobs across the pond. So that's been a priority for us. We got very near to repealing the medical device tax in this budget fight. But
It'll help a lot from
Yeah.
an R&D point of view.
Right.
I know all the haters think it just goes in the pockets of shareholders or whatever, but it really doesn't.
No, I get it. Why disadvantage our country versus other countries? But so on your question, though, that's another thing that I've been working on. So what we noticed was, we noticed that when something comes up for Texas, they all vote together. They all fight like cats and dogs. The Republicans, they have some crazy Democrats, some crazy Republicans. Something comes for Texas, we're all together. We're going to vote for that road or that appropriation or that space station or whatever. When we had Hurricane Sandy, one of the first votes we took was $60 billion off budget for Hurricane Sandy. You know, those fiscal conservatives from New York and New Jersey, they didn't care about that. They were voting for New York and New Jersey, right? We don't do that in California yet, and I'm telling you, this is a project of mine. One thing is that, you know, unfortunately we had, you remember Bob Filner? You've all heard of Bob Filner? Well, there were a lot of those personalities before in our delegation that no one wanted to work with and didn't care to work with anybody. So we've got me, and now Juan Vargas has replaced Bob Filner. If you know Juan Vargas, I'd encourage you to meet him. The most genial, great guy, studied to become a priest, and went into law, went to Harvard Law School with Barack Obama, and now is a border congressman. Really, really great guy, someone you'd like to be with. And he and I are working to get San Diego, first of all, into the rest of the state, but to start to get Southern California, Northern California to stop thinking differently, because we're all one state. So in San Diego, we've identified tourism, the military, and science and technology as our three industries, and we've developed a little coalition about supporting those if federal issues come up. And in the state, if you added those three industries, military, tourism, science and technology, you've got entertainment, you've got trade, you've got agriculture, you got a little bit bigger economy. We just all ought to be pitching in for each other when that comes up. And we may have our fights from time to time. And we had a big fight between the Hollywood and Silicon Valley over content, but they've now resolved that through technology, by the way. So, you know, they had this big fight about whether we would regulate content to protect it. And Silicon Valley, the Facebook and Google people said, don't get us in the middle of that. So they stopped it. They had something wired under the old Hollywood lobbyists had gotten this thing passed, you know, but virtually locked, and bam, Silicon Valley came in and killed it. It was a big fight. Well, it turns out now that Silicon Valley has developed these new encryptions for movies that solve the problem without the government. So we need to start to think more together. The other big fight we have is water. We have to get over that. There's a perception that we're taking their water, but we are really inefficient about how we store water and deliver it. But that's the other big project for us. But beyond that, I think there's no reason for us to be in conflict. We all should think of ourselves as a state just like Texas. And we have 53 out of 435, 12% of Congress is from California.
I mean, imagine if you guys were to pull out on the steps and you have all the Democrats and all the Republicans. Just for the record, I'm not a Republican, but I appreciate conservative Democrats. Thank you for that. I'm kind of a liberal Republican, so we're probably about 5.
Well, then you're not in Congress.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying,
Because they're gone.
I'm really about finding the middle, right?
No, right.
And I think if we could get Californians to just step up and start having some rational conversation,
right.
half the country would follow because they all want to live in California.
Well, they're all, you know, look, people make fun of California, but we invent everything. We're in we do our crazy stuff, and look, we could have a beer over California tax policy. There's a lot of issues with that, but you know, if you think about how well California works, despite all the fun people make of it, I mean, we're generating a lot of stuff, and despite our high taxes, you know, a lot of jobs. Yes, sir.
Congressman, well, three things that I wanted to observe. One is, I think we're like the mirror image of the federal government right now, where we're playing end zone politics. Because we've just staked out our claims and we'll bend to the field, and we don't want to talk in the middle. And it's a pretty sorry commentary coming from where we are, where we invent everything. Maybe we invented a new norm in politics, and that's been adopted at the federal level. I don't know, but I'd like to hear your commentary on that, how that's going to come back to the middle so that there's real conversation instead of just, you know, here's my staked out place and I'll be darned before I move from there.
It's really not as bad as Washington, D.C. in California. And I'll tell you why. Jerry Brown is actually a kind of an independent thinker. And he's tried to do things like pension reform, try to think about some of the long-term budget issues that I don't think, you know, to be honest, most Democrats worried about 10 years ago. And also, he's vetoed a lot of bills that have come up through the Democratic House and or Assembly and Senate. And I can tell you, too, one of my best friends is my bleeding heart liberal former city council colleague, Toni Atkins. She's the majority leader, the #2 Democrat in the Assembly. And she's even saying, listen, we can't blow it. They've got all this responsibility. We can't do stuff that's too crazy. So they're kind of tempering themselves, I think, a little bit. In Congress, the problem I have is that the issue seems to be, it's so politically driven. So much of the stuff that we get to vote on in the House of Representatives, and they don't give us a lot to vote on, is really set up for 30-second ads for the elections. So they know that it's probably something that the president would never approve or the Senate wouldn't adopt. We're just going to put it on the House floor anyway, make everyone take a vote, have something we can point to in the next election. Instead of what you would do in business is you'd sit down with your competitor or your adversary or your prospective customer and say, hey, what can you live with? This is my problem. You'd work it out. And then you'd bring something to the House floor that looked like it had a reasonable shot on both sides. And that's what's not happening at all. There's no discussion. We worked all year to get a budget. I ran on something called no budget, no pay, which is the idea that if you don't pass a budget, Congress shouldn't get paid. Where they actually worked in the California legislature, they used to be late every year with their budget. Do you remember? Every year they were late. And they said, okay, we're going to dock your pay for every day you're late. The first year that was in effect, they were about 3 or 4 days late, and then they were never late again. Now, they may not have created a great budget, but they had a budget, right? But they had a budget, and we don't even have that. So we passed that in the House, got the Senate to pass the first budget that they had passed for 4 years. Now, they were Democrats, but they were in the wrong. They have to pass their budget, right? So I was critical of them. But now we couldn't get the Speaker to appoint a negotiating team to go negotiate with the Senate a budget for America. And do you know what it took for us to get that to happen? They shut down the government, and they were looking for something to say, so they said, okay, we'll have a budget negotiation, which they should have done could have done in April or May. And the problem there is that already everybody's announced, Mr. Boehner announced, well, there's not going to be any revenues. Nobody's going to pay a dime more in taxes. And Mr. Reid in the Senate, the Democrat, said, well, we were already too easy in the last deal. We're going to be really tough to negotiate with this time. So to me, that's not how the country's going to move ahead. And the one piece of hope I'd offer is that the freshmen, we're scratching our heads about why it's this way. There's 85 of us. 20% of Congress was elected for the first time in November. Actually, a year ago yesterday was the election. We were all elected to fix, not to fight. And so there's a lot of discussions among us about how to deal with long-term debt issues, how to deal with some of these serious investment issues. And we all feel pretty confident if the parents would stop fighting, the kids could solve the problem. Sir?
I have a question before we carry on. Are there any backroom estimates as if this would actually impact the economy?
What the effect would have on the economy?
Yes. Because, the talk is that it's relatively a small percent of the population that would actually see their premiums rise. But I know the talk of higher makes it feel like it's just much more significant. And so my question, and somewhat my fear is, will this actually have economic impact? This time, just over a year ago, we had the payroll issue. And, everybody was talking about that as impacting the economy. Well, nothing. Just didn't exist. Wasn't a blip. What about this time around with the premiums?
Well, there's two effects. What's the effect on the government budget and what's the effect on the private sector, and the consumer? And I'll tell you that the argument for the law, and again, I'm not a cheerleader for the law. I wasn't there when, my idea is let's make it work. But the argument for the law was that it would reduce federal spending on health care. It would provide a new market for everyone to participate. And in theory, if you get everyone to sign up, would drive down premiums. And in some places, there's an indication that has worked. Generally in states that have accepted, have not resisted Obamacare, so like California, Kentucky, interestingly, New York, they've seen pretty good responses in terms of premium prices. Other places that have resisted it, or where they don't have the same number of competitors, like Delaware is an example of a place where they're eager to take advantage of Obamacare or to participate, but they don't have enough competitors to drive down the prices. So it's very uneven reports yet. I think the other thing is, I would say you'd be guessing without knowing how that website's going to work. Because if you can't get the kids to sign up, the prices that have been quoted this year, may be one thing, but they may go up a lot. So like I said, I think it would be, I think it's hard to tell. I think there's a lot of questions about the law.
Are there no research or getting research
Yeah.
data on that?
There are, we
To
can,
some extent,
you know,
I mean, that would affect our own businesses. I mean, that, we're thinking about how this would affect us.
I would say that we haven't looked at that at a macro level, but we'll get you that information. We have anecdotes from our own district. Some people say it's going up. In Biocom in our district, they went out and shopped for healthcare, saw a huge reduction in their premiums. They were very happy with it. They set up their own exchange. So again, I think it varies by who you are and what your experience is, but we could find out some of the macro data if that would be useful to you.
That would be hugely useful, because I think, if the skepticism in this room right from early today has been, is affordable really affordable
Right.
in
Yeah.
the Healthcare Act?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we know the Healthcare Act, and it seems to be yet another layer of regulation that we all have to bend before and take care of.
Well, let me just ask you, you have a company?
Yeah, I represent a company in Orange County,
What's the company?
Edwards Life Sciences.
Do they have health, they have a healthcare plan?
No, of course.
Now, they're not canceling their healthcare plan or changing it, right? And have they gotten quotes for next year?
Yeah, and it's looking like it's gonna be metronomically up again.
Metronomically?
Yeah, over the last 20 years, it's been going up and up and up.
Yeah,
and
so
up.
sort of the same rate of increase as before?
So, affordable for whom?
Yeah.
It's not at all clear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you recognize that the healthcare costs have been going up tremendously for years and years and years, so. yeah.
I want to make a comment on that, I want to get your feedback. We talk about healthcare as if it's some fixed thing like a car or like a box or something. But really, the value that comes out of healthcare has been going up also at the same rate as the cost. It's not just the cost of the thing.
Mhm.
It's that we are consuming a different level. We got oncology, cyber knife, radiation, you get all kinds of new technology, right? That's really coming at us, and we're extending life and doing all these things. It's not like,
Oh, interesting, yeah.
you know what I mean? So that nobody's
Yeah.
making the argument on the other side saying, what we're really paying for is a lot of innovation.
Yeah.
Now, we can always argue. we're
Fewer
living
amputations,
longer.
right?
What's that?
Fewer amputations. Healthcare's getting better, right, Mark?
Something like that, I mean,
Yeah.
something like that. I know we always
But
want to
Mike,
look
the
at the
data
big.
doesn't support what you're saying, I'm sorry, I disagree with you. The
I-
data does not support what you just said. Competitive data based on OECD stats just tell you flat out that we're not efficient. We may
Oh,
be
no, I'm not
very,
saying that, but I heard an article one time, or I heard a conversation one time about the richest man in the world, King Louis VIII, or whatever his name was. He would have traded all the money on the planet for a Z-Pack, because he died,
No, but
from
that's
syphilis,
Well,
And
Oh, yeah.
It's like now, nobody dies from syphilis, nobody, right?
Yeah.
I
So,
get that part,
you know.
but, the point that I'm trying to make is,